Chapter 31, A Daring Hunt for Clues. Hunt, hint, mint, mind, find is the word ladder. 3 days passed, 3 quiet days. From her room, Elizabeth kept occasional watch through her window at night, but she saw no crimson light and no sign of the Himeses at the bridge, which was an easy view. In fact, on the afternoon of the day after the incident at the cabin, a bridge under repair do not enter sign went up in front of the bridge, and it was strung with red tape and barriers were placed at either side. When Elizabeth asked Jackson about this, he explained that Norbridge had been meaning to reinforce the bridge for some time, and as a safety measure, it had been closed off. He is trying to keep the Himeses away from it, Elizabeth thought. She was convinced the pair wanted to attempt something, put symbols, maybe, or magical markings on the bridge, to allow the crimson light to pass over and enter Winterhouse. She was also convinced the Himeses had taken the book from her room, but she had no proof of this, and of course couldn't share her suspicions with Freddie, or Norbridge, or Leona. They would think she was a thief or a liar or both, and as she had to admit to herself, as well-intentioned as she felt she had been, she really had made a mess of things by taking and then keeping the Granger book, and now she had to figure a way out of it all on her own. If only there was a way to get into the Himeses' room, she thought. She pictured herself retrieving the book and maybe, just maybe, taking a look in their crate to see what they were hiding. If that crimson light really is Gracella, and if she gets inside Winterhouse and gets her hands on the book, Elizabeth tried not to think that far ahead. It was a torment to her that a guide for children had been stolen, just when the key word was about to become clear. All Elizabeth knew was that the first 2 letters of the key word were A-R. But when she looked in the dictionary and found hundreds of words that began with those letters, she felt even more lost. She and Freddie stayed inside Winterhouse, and although Elizabeth's worries about the Himeses and Gracella and the book were on her mind throughout, the time was otherwise peaceful, even enjoyable. Her nightmares ceased. She read and swam and visited the library. She worked on the puzzle with Mr. Wellington and Mr. Rajput. She attended 2 concerts and 2 movies, and she even helped pack some of the boxes of Florschen in the candy kitchen, all while avoiding Marcus and Selina Himes, who seemed to rarely leave their room. Twice she went by Gracella's locked room. Though she felt so uncomfortable in the dark hallway, she only lingered for a minute or 2. She visited the portrait gallery and kept trying half-heartedly to break Nestor's code with key words beginning with AR. And in her own room late after dinner each night, when the hotel quieted, she practiced summoning the feeling and was consistently able to move one of her books, a solid volume of The Wind in the Willows, ever so slightly. She told no one about this, but it made her feel not only pleased but accomplished. That she was able to do this seemed magical. That was the word that kept coming to her mind. Why me, though? She wondered. In fact, had been wondering now for many days. Why am I able to make things move, and why did I see the silver letters in the book, and Freddie didn't? All of this was a puzzle to her, so she couldn't understand how she, Elizabeth Summers, who had lived with her very poor aunt and uncle in Dreer, and had somehow ended up at Winterhouse for 3 weeks, seemed to be at the center of so many unusual things. It doesn't make any sense, she thought. On the 3rd morning of their confinement, Elizabeth sat with Freddie in his workshop as he put the final touches on his wonder log. It had taken him much longer than he'd hoped to finalize the composition and process, but now his latest wonder log burned steadily in the fire ring without either crumbling away or flaring up too quickly. I think I've finally got it just right, Freddie said. Elizabeth had long since made an entry in her notebook, most famous inventors I've ever met, and put Freddie's name in the first and only position. She was glad their disagreement had faded away. Norbridge should let you stay here permanently now, Elizabeth said. Freddie laughed along with her. I wish. As they talked about the upcoming New Year's Eve party, and even yet again about the Himeses and what the connection might be between them and the crimson light in the bridge, Elizabeth worked idly on a coded message. On the wall, alongside the wrenches and screwdrivers and hammers, hung a silver skeleton key that looked just like the ones used for all the rooms in Winterhouse, and Elizabeth had on occasion wondered why this was in Freddie's workshop. Here, she said, handing Freddie a piece of paper in the alphabet grid. that she'd made in her notebook. He glanced at the message, which was this: BSUKALRPPS Keyword equals flirtion. Freddie took up a pen and began working through the code. When he was done, he glanced at the key on the wall. "This one?" he said, in answer to her message. When she nodded, he said, "I think it opens most of the doors here, but I've never used it." He took it off the hook and showed Elizabeth. The word stamped on it: Master. "Do you mean you think with that key we could get into any room?" she said, Freddie looking at her sidelong. "But we wouldn't want to do that, right?" He hooked the key back on the wall and went to the fire ring. Elizabeth's mind was racing with thoughts of seeing what was inside the Himes' room, but she said nothing to Freddie about this. "I guess if someone left it there," she said, "then they wouldn't mind if we used it." Freddie shook a finger at her and mock scolding. "Seriously," he said, "it looks like one of those keys they use in secret societies or something, like the Masons. I did a report on them once." A thought came to Elizabeth, and then she reached for the pendant around her neck. "There's a symbol of a key on my necklace," she said, holding it up for Freddie to examine. "I don't know why. Maybe it has to do with one of those societies." Elizabeth tucked the necklace back under her shirt. "I never thought of that." Something about what Freddie said made sense to her, though she couldn't figure out why. "Quick," Freddie said out of the blue. "Mason, anagram." "Moans," Elizabeth said after considering for a couple seconds. B plus. B plus why? "Took you so long. Like your wonder log?" "Touché." An hour after lunch that same day, Elizabeth was reading in her room when she looked out the window and saw Marcus and Selina Himes walking toward Lake Luna. She watched them for several minutes, and when she was certain that they were indeed going for a stroll and were bound to remain outside for at least a little while, she dashed out of her room and headed for Freddie's workshop. "What's up?" he said as she burst in. "Remember how you said you wouldn't help me if you... said you would help me if you could?" she said as she caught her breath. He nodded suspiciously. "This doesn't sound good." Elizabeth pointed to the key hanging on the wall. "Just 5 minutes," she said. "I just need your help, and that key for 5 minutes." She strode to the wall and gave Freddie a "may I" look before snatching up the key and heading back to the door. He stood. "I'm not even going to ask where we're going," he said, and they headed to the stairwell and climbed up to the 8th floor, where not 3 minutes later they stood panting before the door of Marcus and Selina Himes. "I don't like this," Freddie said. She pointed to his watch. "You don't even have to know whose room this is." "I know whose room it is." "Well, I won't say a word about any of it. Just keep your foot in the door once I go in, and when 5 minutes have passed, yell for me and I will come out." "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" With those words, Elizabeth realized that from that moment she'd seen the Himeses out her window until now, she'd been in a fury of excitement. Suddenly, she considered what she was about to do, and she felt nervous. The key in her hand felt cold, like some alien object she'd chanced upon and now thought she should return. She looked at the closed door, and she thought of the crate that was inside the room and the book that surely must be in there, too. "I think I do," she said, and she put the key in the lock, turned the handle, and entered. The large front room where she'd sat with Marcus and Selina for tea 4 days earlier looked just as she recalled. She spent a moment scanning the books in sight on the table and shelves, and then searching under the sofas and behind the chairs to see if the book might be hidden somewhere. Nothing. She turned to the unlit corridor. There were 3 doors along it, all closed. When she opened the first to find it was only the bathroom, she felt relieved at how ordinary, how normal it appeared before closing the door. A minute, maybe almost 2, had gone by since she'd entered the Himes' room. Elizabeth opened the next door and switched on the light. A crisply made bed, an open closet filled with clothes on hangers, 2 suitcases in the corner, and a bureau with a half a dozen books on it met her eyes. Again, it all looked so commonplace, so completely ordinary. Elizabeth felt almost reassured. There certainly didn't seem to be anything creepy or threatening about the apartment thus far. Very quickly, she looked around the contents of the closet and opened all the bureau drawers and checked under the bed. Still no sign of the book. A thump sounded from somewhere close by. Elizabeth stood and listened. The noise came again. She shut off the light, closed the door behind her, and stood in the dark corridor to listen. The sound, she was certain, had come from the third and final room. With a deep breath, she moved to it, twisted the handle, and opened the door. Once she flicked the light on, she was baffled by what she saw. The room was almost identical to the one she'd just been in, although there were no clothes in the closet, no books on the bureaus, and no luggage on the floor. All there was in the room, aside from the standard furnishings, was the long plywood crate laid out on the bed like a coffin waiting to be opened. Elizabeth gasped. She had been certain the crate was somewhere in the apartment, but seeing it like this was so disorienting. It took a moment for the sight to register with her. Something thumped from within the crate, and it jostled on the bed slightly. Elizabeth stood rooted in place, as if she had been shot by something. The feeling suddenly wrenched at her from within, and a crash sounded in the room she'd just departed. The crate thumped again. "Elizabeth!" Freddie called. "It's been 5 minutes!" With a trembling hand, she stepped forward and reached for the lid of the crate, which appeared to be sitting loosely atop the long box. When she touched the wood, it felt unusually cold. "Elizabeth! Come on!" Freddie shouted. The crate thumped once more. Elizabeth placed her other hand on the edge of the lid. That takes us to chapter 32, The Corner of the Portrait.